Desperate for fame, a rock band inadvertently unleashes an evil curse. During a heavy metal concert, the energetic crowd cheers after a beloved band finishes their set. Meanwhile, Ivan scares his girlfriend Shadia by jumping from behind her while wearing a full face of stage makeup and fake horns. As the couple share a kiss, the drummer, Baphomet, passes by and jokingly tells them to get a room. When Ivan, the lead guitarist, sees that the man doesn't have his horns on, he says it won't make any sense if he's the only one wearing them. The unfazed drummer says it goes against his beliefs and assures that everything will be alright even if they don't match. Seconds later, Shadia asks if they'll play any new songs tonight, causing the boyfriend to momentarily relive a harrowing memory from a few weeks ago when he locked himself inside his apartment. Then, he says they'll stick to the tour set for the time being, leaving the woman with a concerned look on her face. Backstage, Ivan reprimands his bandmate Devin for using illegal substances before their set and says they need to put on a good show to remind everyone that their band, Abyss Sinister, still exists. Concurrently, Shadia learns from Devin's girlfriend Anya that they haven't sold any merchandise yet, so she encourages a concert goer to buy a shirt, but the man just nonchalantly remarks that he thought the group broke up. Meanwhile, Ivan introduces himself to the other musicians backstage, but the only reason they know of Abyss Sinister is because they had a terrible run in Europe. When it's their turn on stage, the audience immediately leaves, much to their disappointment. Minutes later, Baphomet, Devin, and lead singer Caton express their shared concern that it may be time to quit and go back to their normal lives. Then, they mention the disastrous European tour and the scathing reviews online blogs gave their last record. Suddenly, Shadia joins them and asks if her boyfriend told the others the good news yet. When the men wonder what she's talking about, Ivan finally reveals that he got famous metal producer Fleming to work on their next album. So the bandmates quickly change their mind upon hearing the encouraging development and head back inside the building. After the others leave, Ramsey, the person who handles the band while under the record label, asks Shadia how her boyfriend's been doing since returning home from Europe. Despite remembering Ivan locking himself in his apartment for days, she says she believes he took all the negative experiences in the past months and turned them into something special. Days later, while on their way to Fleming's remote studio in the countryside, Ivan tells Shadia that their lives are gonna drastically change after the album, and he might be able to finally buy her an engagement ring. When they arrive at the property, they wonder if they made a wrong turn somewhere because all they find is an unassuming farm. Suddenly, Fleming appears, introduces himself, and explains that he built the studio in the basement, and they'll be the first band to make use of the space. He says the location is perfect so they can make as much noise as they want without any distractions. In the basement, the producer mentions that the closest town is 30 minutes away and he expects everyone to live in the studio for the next few days, focusing on nothing but perfecting the album. Moments later, Fleming introduces his new assistant, Joe. After hearing the producer's passionate speech regarding his vision for their successful collaboration, the band seems giddy to get started. In the tour bus, Ramsey informs Shadia that he received the label's cut list, and Abyss Sinister's one of the bands they're planning on dropping. So the woman lies and says they can't drop the band now, especially since Fleming said their new songs are some of the best he's ever heard. Eventually, Ramsey promises he'll try to give them more time until they can present the new album to the label executives, much to Shadia's relief. Meanwhile, in the studio, the producer asks what they plan on playing, so Ivan asks the group if they've heard of The Devil's Concerto. He explains that centuries ago, there was a female French composer who mastered playing the violin, but because she didn't come from royalty or money, she fell into obscurity. In her desperation for fame and notoriety, she made a deal with the devil, and in exchange for her soul, the darkness promised to make her music immortal. When the audience finally heard the music, they started slaughtering each other. Eventually, the king imprisoned and executed the woman and tried to burn every single copy of the concerto. However, someone found a copy of the sheet music in the composer's husband's diary. Then, Ivan admits he spent the last few weeks of their European tour to head to Paris in order to get his hands on the infamous composition. Fleming asks if they're writing their songs from scratch in his studio, so the guitarist reveals he already recorded 10 demos with the Devil's Concerto incorporated into each one. While they listen to the first song, everyone falls into a trance and their minds fill with disturbing images and thoughts. Anya, who doesn't hear anything, asks them to turn the volume up. When no one acknowledges her request, she decides to place the headphones on. Suddenly, she listens to what she believes is her mother's voice. Seconds later, the woman screams and tosses the headphones to the floor, and everyone sees that it's covered in maggots. Distraught, she swears she heard her late mother's voice telling her that they're all going to die. After Anya storms off, Ivan asks Devin if he'll chase after his girlfriend, but the indifferent man says she just needs to cry out whatever it is that troubles her. Outside, Shadia sees an unfamiliar woman staring at her menacingly, and she watches Anya enter the barn. In the studio, Caton tells Devin that he has a nosebleed, so Fleming tosses a roll of paper towels at him and orders him to clean up. In the bathroom, the man stuffs tissues into his nose to stop the bleeding. Seconds after he leaves, a specter appears in the mirror. Later, Shadia tells Fleming that he spoke to Ramsey, and she'd appreciate it if they could send the man even a rough cut of the demo as soon as possible. The producer says the record has the potential to become great, but he doesn't want anyone telling the band he said that in fear of them turning complacent and full of themselves. He plays a snippet of one song, but just before the woman falls into a trance, he stops it in time. He assumes she's already listened to the demos with a concerto incorporated into them, but she says that Ivan never played them for her and theorizes it may be because he wanted it to be a surprise for everyone. After she leaves, Fleming sends the file to Ramsey's email just like she asked. That evening, Shadia entertains the group around a campfire by singing a song. Seconds later, Devin asks if she knows where his girlfriend is, and she says she saw the woman heading to the barn earlier. In the barn, a surprisingly calm Anya suggests she and the boyfriend do the deed. When he turns away for a few seconds, her face morphs, implying that she's possessed. Creeped out by her strange behavior, Devin backs away toward the door. Suddenly, the woman levitates from the ground and floats toward him. Then, a rope wraps around his leg, pulling him down to the ground. As Anya states the evil plan she has for him, the terrified man screams. Meanwhile, Ivan leaves the campfire and says he's heading back to the studio to continue working. When Fleming asks if he's always this intense, Shadia reasons he's being focused, but Caton and Baphomet counter that he's acting weirder than usual. Moments later, Anya watches Devin, with a noose around his neck, jump off the barn window. The woman screams when she sees his head and spine separate from the rest of his body. When the others arrive upon hearing her voice, they watch in horror as a rat crawls out of the deceased man's severed head, and then Caton steps on the fleeing animal. Shadia rushes to the studio to inform her boyfriend about what happened. Then, he says everything's gonna be alright because he can play the bass guitar from now on. Shocked that he's still thinking about finishing the record despite the horrific incident, the woman slaps him. Later, they join the others, and when Shadia tries to use her phone, all she hears is the piercing sound of the concerto. Then, she notices that someone moved the bus, but Caton, the driver, swears he didn't do it. So Fleming accuses Ivan of doing so, especially since he's determined to finish the album and doesn't want anyone to leave. To calm everyone down, Shadia says she saw a woman outside that afternoon, but the producer counters that the only people on the farm are him and Joe. Seconds later, the assistant returns and mentions that even though they've got electricity, none of the phones or messaging apps and programs work. He adds that every time he dials a number on his phone, all he gets is the same piercing sound from the concerto. Because the traumatized Anya wants to leave, Caton says he'll go with her, while everyone stays on the farm and waits it out until the morning. In the bathroom, Shadia treats an injury on the nape of her boyfriend's neck that he doesn't know how he sustained. She apologizes for their argument earlier and says she understands he's had a hard time the last couple of months. However, Ivan insists that he still wants to finish the album and that Devin will understand. As they share a reconciliatory embrace, he sees the composer's ghost by the doorway and exclaims that he needs to get back to work. Meanwhile, Anya asks Caton if Devin took his own life because he found out they've been having an affair. The man assures he didn't, because if he did, all he'd do is beat him up and move on with his life. Suddenly, they spot the bus, further convincing the vocalist that Ivan moved it away from the farm. When the man checks on the vehicle, Anya sees Devin's floating head and spine, so she flees into the woods. She runs into the composer's ghost, but when she turns around, she's face to face with her boyfriend who smiles at her with a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. Caton hears the woman scream, and as he looks into the bus from the outside, he sees himself sitting in the driver's seat, smiling menacingly. In the studio, Fleming confronts the guitarist for working despite Devin's death, so the obsessed man reasons they'll dedicate the album to his deceased friend. Suddenly, he doubles over in pain while clutching his chest, implying another injury mysteriously forming on his body. Moments later, Caton returns and accuses Ivan of cursing them by making them play and listen to the concerto. Then, he grabs the sheet music because he believes they need to destroy it. A scuffle ensues between the two men, but the vocalist eventually tears the papers to shreds. Shadia asks where Anya is, and all he says is that the curse got her. Suddenly, a clothless Anya appears in the doorway, so the woman covers her friend's body with a blanket. She sees several bite marks on the dazed woman's skin, and she thinks Caton inflicted them. Seconds later, teeth grow on the bite marks, turning them into snapping mouths all over Anya's body. She attacks Caton and Baphomet, so the others work together to lock her inside a closet. After the bizarre incident, the vocalist says the cursed music caused everything that's happened, but Shadia theorizes the woman she saw earlier slipped a hallucinogen into their drinks. Fed up with their antics, Fleming orders everyone to leave the farm the next morning. In the bathroom, Caton washes the bite mark on his hand with some water. Suddenly, his eye sockets start bleeding. Then his left eye and attached ocular nerve worms out and fall into the sink. Seconds later, the possessed man laughs as he wraps tissue paper around his head like a bandage. Meanwhile, Shadia hears her boyfriend's screams from upstairs, and he finally shows her the injury on his chest. She asks who hurt him, and he points to the intact sheet music on the floor, even though she knows Caton tore them up minutes ago. Finally, the man admits that when he procured the concerto, the seller told him that immortality would come with a price. He insists that the piece is cursed, and that the composer appears in his dreams and shows him horrible things. He adds that when they sold him the concerto, they said that there's a way to reverse the curse. However, before he can expound on it, he fearfully points to the specter, whom only he can see, and he disappears into thin air, leaving only his notebook behind. Later, Shadia shows Baphomet and Joe the notebook, and through the drawings, they wonder how Ivan foresaw what was going to happen to their friends. They decide to try and look for Caton and Ivan so they can leave the property as soon as possible. In the studio, Anya manages to escape the closet, then she sits on the producer's lap. He's convinced that she's a hallucination, so the possessed woman kisses him on the lips. Suddenly, she attacks Fleming by biting his face and snapping his neck, ending his life. Meanwhile, Ivan begs the composer to choose anyone else but his girlfriend. Concurrently, while the trio searches the house, Baphomet envisions Joe turning around with blood spilling from his mouth. Then, he's transported to an unfamiliar area where a monster grabs his head, possessing him. Confused as to where the drummer went, Shadia flips through the notebook and finds a page where her boyfriend wrote the Devil's Concerto in reverse, and she deduces that playing the piece in reverse might end the curse. As they retrieve the sheet music from upstairs, an invisible entity slashes Joe's cheek, leaving a deep gash. In the studio, the possessed Fleming, Anya, and Baphomet appear. Unwilling to surrender his soul to the Dark Lord, Joe takes his own life by impaling himself with a drumstick. While they're distracted, Shadia clicks on the computer, playing the piece in reverse. Then she runs outside, but the composer plays the violin, causing the woman's ears to bleed. Ivan appears and says they can be together forever if she surrenders her soul. Seconds later, the music finally reaches the cursed man, and he writhes in pain. As Shadia escapes, horns emerge from Ivan's temples and his teeth turn into fangs. In the barn, the possessed group surrounds the terrified woman. When her boyfriend bites into her neck, her eyes turn black, and bat-like wings sprout from her back. In the nick of time, the reverse concerto finishes playing, and the couple's friends, including the composer, burst into flames. Shadia watches and wails in grief as Ivan perishes and disappears. Later, she returns to the studio to destroy the USB with the demos and then burns the cursed sheet music in the fire. Convinced she destroyed every trace of the Devil's Concerto, the woman begins her journey to the nearest town. Meanwhile, Ramsey clicks on the email file, and then the demonic Ivan suddenly appears and impales the man with his guitar.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.